Welcome to the Female Hormones workshop. So, ground rules, no mobile phones on during session, please. Please ask questions if we get to the end of the segment, in case you've already had a chance to answer them, and confidentiality, because in some of the questions we are we're hearing some people's stories, so let's just make sure it all stays in the room. That would be great, thank you. Housekeeping, fire escape is right behind you and also from the front door. And please be careful of your heads, the toilet door upstairs, and you do need to shoulder barge out of the bottom toilet door. Female hormones, very exciting. Oh, no, I know. Could we please just raise our hands and consent verbally to being videos? I agree to be videos.
Yes, I
Thank you very much indeed. So, let's go back to...
So I've got another question.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure that everyone's comfortable with me being here for this one.
Well, it's
I am.
hormones in general, but yes, is everyone comfortable for the
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
That's right.
Good question. So let's just go back to our triangle of hormonal health, our good old friend. So we've looked at the blood sugar hormones and how blood sugar hormones are massively affected by stress hormones. Everyone see? Massively affected by stress hormones. And also how stress hormones are massively affected by blood sugar hormones. So there is this really lovely tying in between these two. So now we're going to be looking at female hormones, and as I've said before, it is a sort of sex hormone issue in general, because testosterone is affected. But the reason that we're focusing on the female hormone aspect is predominantly because we are seeing so many issues with female hormones in health. So we're seeing so much infertility, we're seeing so many period issues in girls that are so young. We're seeing so many things like PMDD, which is the PMS but times 1,000. We're seeing polycystic ovary syndrome, we're seeing endometriosis, we're seeing premature menopauses, primary ovarian failure, that's what that technically is called. We're seeing awful menopause. We're seeing so many issues that are going on because of these female hormone imbalances. And I'm not saying that men don't have some of that stuff, but actually men's hormone imbalances are coming because of the adrenal issues, because of the connection with the adrenals making testosterone. But with women, it's so much more complicated. There is the adrenal issue, which has definitely been explored a bit, but there is such a huge issue when it comes to the female hormones themselves. So, I'm going to have a little look at the female cycle. So, we have the 4 weeks, which, general cycle is around about 28 days, isn't it? I think 26 to 35 days is considered a normal cycle, so but about 28 days. So we break that down into the 4 weeks. So in the first week, we have this spiking of the estrogen. Estrogen starts to spike, and estrogen is an exciter hormone. It's actually why when we start bleeding, we start to go, oh yeah, the world feels better again. It's a stimulating hormone, yeah? And estrogen is responsible for so many things in the woman's body. It's amazing. It's weight regulation, it's energy, it's mood, it's luscious hair, it's lovely skin, it's where we get our curves, it's all the good stuff, right? All the really great stuff with estrogen. What else?
You said them all.
Yes,
The skin, the curves, and it's what makes us soft.
Yeah, really soft. So it is the difference between men and women. Ironically, men can have estrogen and women have testosterone, but really it's the physical changes in women. It really is the primary sex hormone. So this is why we start to feel really great as soon as we've bled, or at least we should. And then week 2, estrogen peaks and then starts to drop off just as testosterone starts to peak. And what's interesting is testosterone is also a get up and go hormone. it ramps us up. Yeah, it's libido, it's all of those things. And of course, we're going to have a little testosterone spike in week 2 as women, just around the time that we're ovulating, or just as it's coming into week 3 and we're ovulating, because we need that little burst of libido to mean that we want to go and get our jiggy on, which means that there's a chance that we're going to fall pregnant and procreate. So we get that little burst of testosterone, just so everything just looks a little extra 10% more fabulous. Laura calls it ham season. It's like a cartoon when they see the like there's Tweety Bird. Coyote sees Tweety Bird, and then suddenly sees it like a giant ham. It's ham season. So we have the testosterone peaking, and then when we come into week 3, testosterone's starting to drop off, estrogen's also dropping off, just as progesterone starts to rise. Now, progesterone is a really interesting hormone. So progesterone is the progestation hormone. That's what it does. It lines the womb. It's what is the hormone that helps us to keep a baby. So it is getting ready for fertilization. That's what's happening, is the body is getting ready. And it's when we haven't had a fertilized egg that progesterone drops off, and it's the progesterone dropping off that causes the baby. So progesterone isn't an exciter hormone. Progesterone, and this is really important because we're going to be coming back onto it later, progesterone is a calming hormone. It's what aids sleep. It's why that week before we bleed, that we're really sort of sleepy, we just kind of a bit groggy, we basically just want to sit down with Netflix, yeah? That is why, just as that last part of week 3 is what's peaking, just as we come into week 4 and the bleed, it's why everything needs to be a bit snuggly, because it's this calming down. It's also, as estrogen is dropping off, why we have less tolerance, because we need everything to be easy, to be calm, and we haven't got the testosterone and the estrogen to kind of force us on and keep us going. Yeah, so we get quite snappy. Don't know if you'd ever noticed. So progesterone is a really, really, really important hormone. Aids sleep, does loads of stuff. In fact, the recent research shows that it's actually progesterone that is more involved in bone density than estrogen. Yeah, really, really interesting, really interesting. So that's the female cycle. Does that make sense? Yeah, that's kind of how it should look. Yeah? But we're getting a situation where that isn't happening. We're getting a situation where women are so stressed that they aren't making enough testosterone. We're getting a situation, we're going to come on to in a moment, where women aren't making progesterone. And we're getting a situation where our environmental factors, so toxic chemicals, outgassing, foods, are actually causing the body to have too much estrogen. So there's this huge connection, which is why the female hormones are on the triangle of hormonal health, when I can find it. Because actually, what's really interesting is diabetes is not only caused by, obviously, blood sugar hormone, we all know that, that's so old paradigm, but actually this, illumination that stress hormones is a huge contributor towards diabetes. But actually, estrogen is also a huge contributor to diabetes, because it's the chemicals in processed food, it's the stress, all of these things contribute to more estrogens being in our body, and actually this excess estrogen then causes fat storage, causes all these things. So a classic, and this is in men too, so classic obesity, the diabetes obesity, is when we're talking about men who have started to get curves like women, or when we've got some really big move issues going on. Yeah, like this is a real estrogen imbalance. Yeah? So interestingly, there are actually different types of estrogen, because there's the estrogen that our body makes, and there's also estrogens that come from the environment. And estrogens that come from the environment are called xenoestrogens. So every single cell of our body has a receptor for estrogen, whether we're male or female. Estrogen is such an important hormone. Every single cell of our body has this receptor for estrogen. And when we come in contact with toxic chemicals, food we're intolerant to, etc., the body will latch on to these xenoestrogens and absorb them, and then those xenoestrogens are mimicking our estrogen. And so estrogen goes up and up and up and up. And we're now in a situation globally, one of the big global health crises is the fact that we are walking around with estrogen dominance. Not enough progesterone, not enough testosterone compared to the amount of estrogen. So what's really interesting with that is when I get clients who have, so male clients who have come in with adrenal exhaustion to see me, and they've been working with, say, an endocrinologist, and the endocrinologist says, oh, you haven't got enough testosterone. And then they put them on testosterone, but it actually makes their symptoms worse. It's actually like, no, that's not the issue. Firstly, we've got to fix blood sugars. Secondly, we've got to fix the stress hormone. Third, actually by reducing estrogens in that male body, we can then naturally elevate the testosterone. Interesting, isn't it? So again, what I love about this functional nutrition and the functional kinesiology perspective is, you know, modern medicine are applying the solution here, whereas actually we need to look here. We need to look at the root cause, because otherwise it's just a sticking plaster. And the body might not need testosterone, it needs something in the middle fixing. Yeah? So that's the female cycle. Any questions on that? Okay. So the other time that we do have estrogen dominance is in peri to postmenopause. So peri to postmenopause is a bit of a mess. So what happens with the female cycle in peri to postmenopause is we have progesterone just naturally falls off. That's the first thing to start going in perimenopause. Is the progesterone starts to drop off. This can happen any time from about 35 onwards. And those would be the kind of symptoms that women wouldn't really, there's a great little thing, little video on social media a while ago, wasn't there, which was some woman kind of going, is it here or is it hot in here? Is it perimenopause? I don't know. And then it's, I can't really remember anything. Is that perimenopause? I don't know. And then she's at the doctor's and she's saying, is this perimenopause? He's like, I don't know. Because there's not enough going on to sort of see it in a blood test for it to be kind of conclusive. So again, women can slip through the net for years with perimenopausal symptoms, and it's just this decrease in progesterone that just causes a bit of forgetfulness, not sleeping properly. One of the first things is just an elevated anxiety, because progesterone is so calming. So it's the why am I a bit anxious? Yes, chances are by that age, they might have small children in the mix, so the stress levels have gone up and blood sugars are unstable because they're busy and juggling work and life and blah, 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 blah. But also added to that is this progesterone dropping off, which is why the triangle includes the female hormones on the other side. Because now we have to look at it in whole. It's not just blood sugars, it's not just stress, it's also this progesterone possibly dropping off. We're going to talk more about that in a moment, about why it's not just perimenopause, because this is also happening earlier and earlier. So primary ovarian insufficiency, which is actually what premature menopause is called, it's the ovaries stopping doing their primary job. That is now being diagnosed earlier and earlier and earlier. The youngest person in this country to be diagnosed with POF is 17 or 17. I don't know. Shocking. And we have to look at why is that? Because I know from my journey that like they go, oh, you're in menopause. There you go. Off you go. Let's look at HRT. But the medical system doesn't look at why. And even down to So I suffered some really huge birth trauma having my daughter 16 years ago. That for me is that put my adrenals into so much shock that I was instantly into HPA axis dysregulation, instantly. But because that's not dealt with medically, it had to get to the point where my body fell over and went into early menopause. So now we've got that. Now we've got that diagnosis. All is well and good, because go away and be menopausal. Have some HRT. Stop you getting osteoporosis. But until we're then fixing the adrenal issue underneath, of which blood sugars can be a contributing factor, the HRT is actually going to make the situation worse. Because HRT is a high level of estrogen, which is going to be ramping up already wired adrenals. Yeah? Make sense? I'm going to come back onto that. So, we have peri to postmenopause. So we've got this progesterone dropping off. The beginning of this is these little symptoms that we go, I just don't really understand why am I putting on a bit of weight, just a bit more anxious, not sleeping so well, blah, 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 blah. And that kind of continues. That doesn't get any better. But then, oh, I'm selling it, aren't I? It's so much joy. But then we have estrogen starting to go haywire. It doesn't follow this nice smooth pattern. That would be easy. It does this. It literally. But even when it's at its lowest, there is still more of it to the progesterone, and therefore we're estrogen dominant. So estrogen dominance is hideous. Estrogen dominance is headache, insomnia, weight gain. Estrogen dominance causes insulin resistance. That's why there's this connection on the triangle. So if we eat insulin resistant, we go into fat storage. It's so classic on perimenopausal women, or let's rephrase that now to not just peri to postmenopausal women, women with estrogen dominance. And when we start to look at why that would be, you can see why that's so many people. Why are we suddenly putting on 2 stone? Why aren't we sleeping properly? Why am I more food intolerant? Because when I'm estrogen dominant, I have elevated histamine, which means I'm more intolerant to things. I'm more, and I don't mean, partners. I mean foods, I mean chemicals, I mean whatever. And partners. These are the things that estrogen dominance is a massive highlight of. And the difficulty with the modern medicine approaches, they'll draw blood, they'll look at estrogen and they go, well, you're fine, you're within the normal parameters. Yes, but where is it compared to my progesterone, compared to where it was before I got to this place? We don't have those markers done throughout our lives, or very rarely. So we don't know what is estrogen dominance for one is not estrogen dominance for another. It can be subtle, it can be tiny. So we've got this situation, so this is normal for peri to postmenopause, but actually we've got the situation that most women are now starting to experience this, and not just women, like I say, this is also happening to men. So taking out the progesterone issue, the estrogen dominance is also happening for men. So I'm actually dealing with an issue of estrogen dominance with my 16-year-old daughter. And it's the classic signs of periods a bit scanty, sort of bigger boobs, has had sleep issues, low levels of anxiety. And when you talk to the doctors, they say we're going to put you on the pill, which is putting more estrogen into a system that's already overloaded with estrogen. So this is where the science behind HRT contraception and using that as medicine doesn't make sense to me. When we're in a situation of estrogen dominance, how does putting more estrogen into it help? It just doesn't. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the reason we're going into estrogen dominance is something called the pregnenolone steal. So in our adrenal glands, we make cholesterol. But we don't make cholesterol. We need cholesterol in our adrenal glands to make hormones. One of the hormones we make is pregnenolone. And pregnenolone makes progesterone and it makes DHEA. However, if we have any stress applied here, the body doesn't want progesterone, it doesn't want to be able to hold a baby. It needs to get away from the issue, so we turn progesterone into cortisol. So now we're walking around with cortisol instead of progesterone. So what happens here is we're not getting our surge in progesterone. We're now just probably, flatlining, and now we've got this disparity between estrogen and progesterone. Yeah? So this is why we're starting to see almost like low-level menopause symptoms occurring in a lot of women who are actually quite young. So it's this excess estrogen that is the cause of PCOS, endometriosis, infertility, PMDD. Yeah? But the question is, why is it happening? And it's happening because our stress hormones are completely out of balance and our blood sugars are completely out of balance. And our environment is being flooded with toxic chemicals that increase estrogen, that mimic estrogen. Yeah? It's a really big issue. It's a really big issue. So, problems with estrogen, like I said, would be symptoms associated with estrogen would be things like definitely infertility, the PMDD, painful periods, heavy periods. There's all too much estrogen. These are like basic things that most women experience. Acne, digestive, cysts, yes, breast cysts. So when you're getting the cysts that aren't cancerous, that's too much estrogen.
Things like fibroids.
Fibroids, absolutely. Fibroids, any of the excess hair, polyps, any of those things are excess estrogen. So we need to reduce the estrogen, we need to get that down. Issues with not enough progesterone, absolutely infertility, 100%, because it's the holding the baby. Lack of sleep, being anxious, being wired, being tearful, that's very definite, lack of progesterone. Lack of testosterone, hair thinning, no gap and go, like real fatigue, no libido. Headaches is a definite too much estrogen, not enough. That's the thing. Estrogen dominance is a misnomer. Because of the pregnenolone steal, it's a progesterone deficiency. Yeah? So two things have to happen. We have to increase the progesterone, we have to reduce the estrogen. Yeah? Make sense?
This makes me quite cross because I have PMDD, and when I spoke to the doctor about it, I had a really bad period, phase, like about 6 months last year, and all they did was give me antidepressants. They don't talk about any of this. And then they tell you need to talk to a therapist or a counsellor and I was like, I'm not depressed, this is absolutely hormonal, there's nothing wrong with me. They don't talk about any of this.
Yeah, I really hear that being crossed.
It's terrible.
It is, and the piece of work that I had to do with that was that the understanding that the doctors themselves aren't to blame here. The doctors themselves are just taught a process and a procedure, and they absolutely have to follow that process and procedure. They're bound by the NICE regulations. So even when, I've had almost stand-up rows with a GP when I was trying to get, I'm going to talk about HRT in a moment, when I was trying to get natural progesterone, that they have access to. And I'm sat there talking about the pregnenolone steal, like writing out, going, you know this science. You know better than I do how hormones are made in the body, how the precursors work. And their stock answer is, we don't work that way. We don't work that way. That's their only response. And that is really heartbreaking, but also for me it shows how therefore exciting it is that there is now this science, that there are the first line coaches who are able to help. Because just piling people with antidepressants, anti-anxiety meds, estrogens. At my worst, my insomnia was so horrific. I was on amitriptyline, Valium, I had a night nurse addiction. Like, that's when it actually got silly. I was like, I need the amitriptyline and the Valium and prescribed, but now it's night nurse. And actually all my body was craving was natural progesterone. But even they would rather hand out the amitriptyline and the Valium than natural progesterone.
Why is that? Is that because it's not, they can't rely on research, or they've not researched it themselves, and why?
Good question. That means we need to move on to. It's a really, really good question. Ultimately, with the NHS, it often comes down to cost. Often, not always, but often. So, the progesterone that is in the Mirena coil, the pill, or HRT, is a synthetic. And that synthetic costs around about 34p a day. Now, what's interesting with the synthetic is that to make it patentable, you can't patent a natural hormone, you can't patent a natural chemical hormone. So they've tweaked it a little bit to make it patentable. Now, if you look at the chemical composition of progestin, the synthetic progesterone, and you look at the chemical composition of progesterone, they look completely different. But what progestin looks almost identical to is testosterone. And this is really, really important because testosterone was what hormone?
Exciter.
An exciter hormone. And progesterone is a calming hormone. So now what we've got are often women with too much estrogen, which is also an exciter hormone. We've got women with often too much estrogen now being given a synthetic hormone, which is supposed to be a calming down hormone, but it's also a ramping up hormone. And now we have this situation that the body is under so much stress that even our body trying to naturally make progesterone through the adrenal glands because of the pregnenolone pathway, it can't make it because the body is so stressed, because it's like literally under attack from these synthetic hormones. So this is really, really common that I get women coming into my clinic who were probably stressed, then went into perimenopause, but didn't know they went into perimenopause. And the doctors put them on HRT, and then they're crawling into my clinic. And they are, broken, absolutely broken. And on, bagfuls of medication, anxiety, depression, sleep, water retention, you name it, because those HRTs have ramped up their system so much. But it's the same when we put 16-year-old girls with heavy periods onto the pill. And we've got young girls with anxiety, we've got young girls with suicidal thoughts, we've got young girls with depression. But it's because it's the only thing that they think they've got. So actually they do have this alternative, and they have it in all the countries where they have a big pharma. And it's a natural progesterone made from sweet potatoes. Yams. Can't remember one sweet potato on the yams. And they tend to give it more for women with fertility issues where they can't give them the synthetic progesterone, where they're actually trying to get the body to kickstart and work normally. Isn't that bonkers? So they'll give it for those things, but they don't tend to give it for period issues and HRT. But actually it's that natural progesterone which stops this estrogen dominant issue. And we've got, who doesn't resonate with this? Like, everyone's walking around with too much cortisol. So we're predominantly in the pregnenolone steal as women, predominantly. Regardless of peri to postmenopause, we're in this anyway. So actually what most women need is this sort of small injection of, you know, natural progesterone. Either that can be by food if it's a very, very minor symptom, or as those symptoms are getting worse, the doctors could be giving out the natural progesterones. Yeah, make sense?
Mm-hmm.
It becomes really, really interesting. So the pill and HRT, we really advise people not to be on, because those synthetic progesterones, even things like the Miranacol, where they say it's local, not systemic, it's in your blood. How can anything, any hormone that ends up being presented in your blood, how can that stay local? It has to be systemic. So you don't want that ramping up hormone, you know, anywhere else in your bloodstream. So, you know, the Miranacol was started to stop women's bleeds, usually because their bleeds are too heavy. But why are their bleeds too heavy?
Made me bleed for 18 months. I pulled it out myself.
Because that's the alternative, is it actually makes the symptoms worse.
Yeah.
Yeah. And usually in the meantime, we've had all this testosterone, you know, mimicking hormone going on. So now we're kind of wired, anxious, heart palpitations, blah, 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 blah. The other issue that we have with the pill, and this is something I'm personally really grumpy about, is that no one signs a disclaimer at the age of 16 or 17 when they're usually first put on the pill that says that this could mess everything up. So I've actually had an experience in the last few months with 3 different clients coming in, all in their early 30s, that have been on the pill for sort of anywhere between 7 and 15 years. And what happens is, if you remember our endocrine system, and you remember our pituitary gland, and the conversations, we've got the adrenals, we've got the ovaries and testes, the thyroid. If you've got this huge amount of estrogen and progestin going into the bloodstream, then the conversation, the pituitary conversations between these, you know, the thyroid and the ovaries, is that signal is being messed up on purpose. Yeah, we're overloading the body with the hormones so that this message doesn't need to happen. So we're overwriting that message, and guess what happens? The body stops doing it. So the body stops that message. So then we have a situation where women are coming off the pill and 3 years later still not having a bleed. So then that's called primary pituitary failure. And then the doctors go, oh, whoops. But why are we signing disclaimers to say, this isn't, you know, I understand that I could end up infertile if I take this. It's pretty shocking, actually. And now they're kind of handed out like sweets. And so this is why it's so important. So if it's not about contraception, this is why it's so important that when girls are quite young, and it's a heavy period issue or just a period issue in general, that we deal with this properly. So contraception, of course, is the difficult one, because then we have to look at alternatives. So then we have to look at things like condoms, the copper coil, good old-fashioned copper coil, which now you no longer need to have even had a pregnancy to have, because they've changed the technology. And there's that new one, the DAISY system, isn't there, that you can do sort of temperatures, but they're now really accurate. So there are alternatives, and encouraging younger women to look at those alternatives is really important, really important. Any questions on those?
What is a natural source of progesterone? You said sweet potatoes, but I assume that would be...
Yeah, flax seeds, really, really high in natural progesterone.
Is there anything
Yeah.
else?
Flaxseed muffins are great. So yeah, I mean, actually, yes, we can go to food with progesterone,
Yeah.
but the best way to increase our progesterone is to reduce our stress, so our body starts making the progesterone. So diet, yes, reduce the stress, and then reducing the estrogen. So the way that we reduce the estrogen is we reduce our exposure to toxic chemicals, we stop eating foods we're intolerant to, and we can also look at supplements that reduce estrogen. And these end up being quite technical supplements that will work to help the liver clear out the excess estrogen. So they're things like something called DIM, which is diindole methylene, and it's a supplement of what would essentially be bucketfuls of broccoli. And those cruciferous vegetables actually enable the body, the liver, to do the detoxing pathway to get rid of estrogens. And those are therapeutically really powerful supplements that are on par with pharmaceuticals in terms of how sort of efficient they are.
What was the initials of the DIM one?
DIM.
No, sorry, the stuff. I said it the wrong way around. What does the DIM stand for?
Diindomethylene. That's the active ingredient in broccoli, which is why when we start talking about food, we're like, get those non-starchy vegetables in your body, because especially when we know that even men can have an estrogen imbalance, in with your broccolis, in with your cauliflowers, in with your cabbages, in with all of those leafy greens, up. So I'm talking about 15.
Does that include all the seaweed and spirulina?
Good question. Seaweed and spirulina contain very high levels of iodine, so they're wonderful for the thyroid. Even an overactive thyroid often requires iodine because the iodine has been stripped out of our soils. That's why a lot of women are walking around with an underactive thyroid. Spirulina particularly is also very high in protein. So spirulina is an adaptogenic herb that we work with, particularly nervous system, but B, it's also, I use it as an adaptogen often for vegans because just trying to get some kind of proteins into them is great.
And will you be going over tofu later? Because I'm really confused as to what's a good tofu and a bad tofu for.
Let's do that now.
Okay.
We can do that now. So tofu and when we're talking about protein powders, the issue that I have with soy protein powders is because they're so estrogenic.
Yeah.
And the difficulty is sometimes that soy is really beneficial. What it can do is, I just think I can draw that, I don't think I can. So if we've got an estrogen that's a xenoestrogen, that's mimicking estrogen, a plant estrogen like soy can actually clear that out of the body. But if we are in a situation where we are massively estrogen dominant or estrogen cycling, then the plant estrogen can compound the problem. And personally, I think it's really hard to know when to have the soy and when not to have the soy.
Just
So
don't have it.
I personally say don't have it unless you are postmenopausal and we're trying to shoehorn estrogen into you, because so the signs of not enough estrogen are the really lovely menopause symptoms of the big hot flushes. So there's two types of hot flushes. They're the ones that come from your feet really fast and end up in a sweat. That's lack of progesterone and too much cortisol. And then there's the ones that start in the centre and then radiate out and last for about 10 minutes. That's lack of estrogen. So when people are in those situations, the nice vaginal dryness, where it's a bit like Sahara, the real forgetfulness, the world looking grey, like really, it's just, there is nothing. That's very, very low estrogen, but you are talking about someone probably being a year post-menopause, so maybe even 2 years after their bleed, that then we're looking at really needing estrogen. That's the way I look at it in clinic. It's only after they've really finished that last bleed that now estrogen can start to be playing a part. So going back to the HRT thing, you know, I do say to people, well, the natural progesterones that you get from the doctors, the doctor will always say, well, you need the estrogen gel to go with it, or an estrogen patch. And I go, that's great, we'll hold off taking that. Just hold off, because we've got to make sure you're metabolizing all your estrogens first, yeah? And that's why just the HRT isn't going to do it. So yeah, so we go in that way.
Is that any soy or just soy powders? Just soy.
So the argument is that tofu is better than soy powders because it's not processed. I would still say if you've got any period issues, unless you're a postmenopausal woman or a man with prostate cancer, because that's actually a whole hormone imbalance itself, avoid it. Avoid it. And this is part of the difficulty with veganism. It's part of the difficulty.
And if you have estrogen dominance, what about chickpeas? Is that something to avoid as
You've
well?
just got to go really careful. So estrogen dominance equals insulin resistance equals weight gain easily. So one of the first things we do is we have to go really careful with starchy carbs. So they're not our enemies, they are our friends, but we just have to be very strict on those portion controls. Again, the issue with veganism. Yeah? So it's not that I'm anti-veganism, but to do it properly, you are substituting with a lot of protein powders, a lot of non-soy protein powders.
Sorry, with underactive thyroid or Hashimoto's, is soy a bad thing?
I would definitely be avoiding it because
Yeah.
there's something going on that these chemical signals are all mixed up.
Yeah.
And that excess, the xenoestrogens could be putting stress on the body. So when we really break the whole world and all of our symptoms down to, is it blood sugars, is it stress, is it hormones, what's the interplay between them, actually it becomes much more simple and you go, yeah, that's soy, just no soy.
Even for menopausal women? Or
With the
postmenopausal?
underactive thyroid, I mean,
Someone's menopausal.
I'd
and
be careful,
underactive,
I'd be careful.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
Yeah.
because the problem with an underactive thyroid is you're always going to struggle with weight maintenance,
yeah.
and if there's the wrong estrogen,
Mhm.
it's just going to be weight gain.
Sure. Yeah.
So that is the problem with estrogen because they're confusing. Because for some people it's like these are amazing,
Yeah.
and for some people not so much.
Yes.
So even with sort of soy and tofu, I would be with women with the big menopause symptoms. I'd be going in with something like a maca powder, which is an estrogen mimicker,
Yeah.
rather than either soy itself.
So for me, I think I've got high estrogen, but I'm vegetarian, but I do eat fish. But I'm just trying to think of what foods I can have, which I'm going to increase.
Yeah, and so that's the
So
thing.
it's the
Absolutely.
powder thing.
The powders. Do you eat eggs?
Yeah.
Eggs, fish, on repeat, and powders. So a good protein shake in the morning,
But
eggs
then
or
there's the
fish.
issue with cholesterol with eggs as well. No issue.
No, that's a complete health myth. So cholesterol is a response to inflammation in the body. So the
Yeah.
liver produces cholesterol when we have inflammation, and if our arteries have started to inflame, then they get bigger, and then little teeny tiny microscopic cracks appear, and then the cholesterol is produced by the liver to become like polyfiller. So it's a response to inflammatory foods we're eating. It's not if I eat a food high in cholesterol, I'm going to get cholesterol. So it's more a response to wheat, milk, sugar, anything we're intolerant to, stress, rather than a food that's high in cholesterol. So actually there's a lot of science, and a good one to check out this is the Paleo Mom, who's a doctor, and she has absolutely kind of gone crazy with the nutritional research into things like eggs, and now the paleo movement really strongly promote, if you're not egg intolerant, having eggs every single day.
Can you just say again about the difference between the flushes again?
Yes, absolutely. So the flushes that kind of are quick and quite violent, where you can end up sort of with the sweating sort of very quickly and suddenly you're bright red, that's usually a cortisol spike and a drop in progesterone. So it's low progesterone, high cortisol. It's that pregnenolone steal kind of thing. So when women are getting those hot flushes, I'm not even thinking estrogen. And that, to be honest, is because you know where progesterone drops off at the beginning of menopause, that tends to be when women are getting those hot flushes to begin with. So now we have to look at lifestyle, we have to get that stress down, and we have to look at how we can build that progesterone up. So that's those flushes. And then as menopause goes on, then we start to get the ones that radiate from your core. And they're really interesting if anyone's ever had those, because they're the ones where you can sort of sit up from the sofa and you can feel behind you and the cushions are still hot 10 minutes later, because you literally become this huge radiator. So they start from your core, they're slow, and they last more than 10 minutes or up to
Night
10 minutes.
I can ask about night sweats.
Night sweats can be a bit of both, but I also look at night sweats as also blood sugars dropping, so it can be the cortisol. So they can be a bit of both, but it depends where you are in the menopause. Yeah.
So the 10-minute flushes are what?
Estrogen.
Estrogen.
Estrogen deficiency. So it's the only time we end up estrogen deficient. But what's really interesting is we can end up with too much of the bad estrogens whilst we haven't got enough of the good estrogen. And then if we're on HRT, because it's the wrong estrogen for postmenopause, that starts being seen by the body as one of the bad estrogens. So we're still experiencing all of the symptoms of menopause because we've got too much of the bad estrogens, which is why I then say to women, we're going to detox the HRT, we're going to get those bad estrogens down, we're going to clean up your diet, we're going to clean up your toiletries, and we're going to help your liver by things like DIM, and then we can start to bring estrogen back in a small amount.
So if people are having those, the quickie flushes, then actually looking at the blood sugar and the stress,
Yeah.
or blood sugar first, to get that, because
Yeah.
that will help. That's the kind of avenue.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay.
And that would be then when they could be going to their doctor and saying, I'd like to look at natural progesterone. The doctor will need to do blood tests for that, but that's absolutely when I'm referring my clients to go and do that.
Interestingly enough, my doctor, and I went to the HRT clinic, so I saw, I don't know if she specialised in HRT as a prescription anyway, but after I had hysterectomy, and then I had 18 months later had my ovaries removed. And then they have put me on various different things and done loads of tests and stuff, but I still have a cycle, but obviously I don't have any uterus or ovaries, but I still have a cycle, and I 100% know I do. And she said to me, no you don't, and I said, no I do, I really do, and I've never had a cycle ever, and I'm like, I'm telling you now I do. And she said, that can't be possible, but a lot of women report it. But equally, they have never tested my progesterone levels, ever, and said I don't need it because I don't have a uterus, so therefore I don't need to have progesterone to build up the lining. Yeah.
But that's looking, so there's a couple of things, thank you for sharing.
That's all right.
So there's a couple of things there. The first is that, well, I'm surprised that they're saying it's not possible for you to have a cycle when your adrenals will be making those.
That's what I said to her. I was like, well, hang on a second, so my ovaries aren't producing the progesterone, like it's not that simple. I was
It's
like,
not
it
that
comes from here. So, and all the connections, she was like, no, you don't need it.
Yeah, I mean,
Bizarre.
and so technically, the way I have to respond to that would be the medical response, which is if we don't have a uterus, we don't need progesterone.
Mm-hmm.
But because progesterone doesn't just do that one job,
No.
we actually know that's rubbish. And I've just had a friend who's just had stage 1 endometrial cancer, had her uterus removed. She had it, this is so brilliant, she had it removed in the last month of her 1 year of no bleeds. So she'd already mostly gone through menopause. It was like unreal. I think it was to the day. It was like something hilarious. We were like, okay, well, you're not going to be in a forced menopause then. So she had that, and she had been on the Utrogestin, the natural progesterone, as HRT. She'd managed to get it from her GP. So she'd been on that, and then as soon as she had her uterus out, the doctor went, yeah, you can't be on that. You can't have it. And so she then started to see an amazing expert in Harley Street, which is when I can no longer give clients bioidentical hormones that are of the right level, because when people are really deep in menopause, sometimes we need more. If we've gone into menopause very stressed, I refer them to this woman who also was brilliant for me. And she went and saw Dr. Arasu, who instantly said, of course you can have progesterone, because if there isn't a uterus, it won't build the uterus. But it will be helping with sleep, it will be keeping you calm, it will be doing all of those things. It will be stopping the hot
And
sweats.
interestingly, a year ago, I was diagnosed with adult ADHD.
Yeah, that makes
So-
sense, right?
Yeah, of course it does. So then they'll give you like dexamphetamine, but they won't give you progesterone. So you're like, right, okay. Yeah, complex.
It's so complex,
Yeah,
and so
it's
then
interesting though.
for
but
me, looking at it in that very simplistic way, which is the way that the medical model does it, doesn't work.
No.
And you've already said that
Yeah.
you're the fallout of that.
Yeah.
And whilst we could get really annoyed about it, it's also so
Yeah.
exciting that this.
It makes me more
science is
passionate
now-
about like the whole thing. Like I can sit here and I'm angry, but at the same time that turns into like, no, people need to know like when they can't get the answers they want from their GP, which I've never got. Like this is why this is important to
It's so
spread the word.
Yeah, I've got like a list of women in my head who I want to tell things to because they won't have been exposed to this and they've
It's
got
so
X, Y, or Z
exciting.
issue.
honestly, I'm so passionate about it. I could cry because
Mm,
it's like
same,
we
yeah.
just need to know. We
Yeah.
all need to
So I
know.
went on the pill when I was 12 for exactly that, like 4-week bleeds, like
And then at
Shots
what point
everywhere.
do you come off the pill? And at what point do you know, it just doesn't make sense to me. And, you know, you can have a doctor spouting science to me as much as they like. I'm still going to sit there and go, really basic issues.
absolutely.
It's not fixing the problem.
I went on the pill at 12 and I came off last year, but my symptoms are exactly the same now as they were when I was 12.
Exactly.
Doesn't fix them.
Exactly. It's a sticking plaster. So, supplements for good hormones. So did that answer the question about the soy? Did that finish answering that question? Yeah? It's a tricky one because some people swear by it, but it just causes, yeah. And because we can't measure the level of the xenoestrogens in the body, personally I don't think it's particularly safe.
It's just one about pomegranate juice, because I was thinking that is a good one for reducing the estrogen, but then you have the blood sugar spike, so how would you
You'd have to count it as your starchy carb.
With protein, would you have it? Or?
You could basically make a sort of a juice with extra protein and fat in it.
Okay.
So this is the thing, is that starchy carbs are never, you know, not allowed, but we have to just offset them.
Mix it,
Yeah, or you count it as your starchy carb against another meal.
but not have it on its own in isolation, like the
No.
juice.
No. So one of the ways I look at the blood sugar or carbohydrates, the starchy carbohydrates are like a helium balloon, and so what they're going to do to your blood sugars as soon as you let go of that balloon is they're going to spike. So what we need to do is the protein and the fats, weigh them down. That's what we're looking to do. We want to hold on to our balloon. Yeah. And because the issue gets even more compounded, because if people have had digestive issues, they're very likely to have something called small intestine bacterial overgrowth, and the bacteria produce xenoestrogens. So now we're in this battle of,
Do you condone the probiotics though?
for SIBO, for small intestinal bacterial overgrowth,
In general.
if people have got small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, you're actually causing more bacterial overgrowth, because it's like you can't take a nuclear waste site and just try and plant flowers. You've got to clean it out first.
Alright.
So probiotics could actually make you very, very bloated, feel very nauseous and unwell. So our experience, you know, we started, this triangle came about because I work with irritable bowel syndrome. People with IBS can't really tolerate probiotic. You have to get the environment right first. Yeah, and SIBO can be dealt with. We actually deal with that in the digestion module. So supplements for good hormones. Guess what I'm going to say? Magnesium. Magnesium's huge for estrogen, huge for progesterone, huge for all of them, massive. Zinc as well. Omegas, because the omega is going to clear out those xenoestrogens, it's going to clear out the estrogen dominance, it's supporting the liver. One of the reasons, you know, it's so good, we go on about it so much, is when you think about fats, all fats have to be processed by the liver. Well, the liver's already very, very stressed because it's dealing with too much cortisol, too much estrogen. Essential fatty acids don't go through the liver, they just go directly into the cells and detox the cells that way. So that's why they're so great, so great. And the estrogen reducing liver support like DIM. Yeah, there's a couple of those that are very technical, that really, really support the liver to clean out.
So Holland and Barrett, I've already Googled in the break, do magnesium and zinc together. Is that?
They do, and the difficulty with magnesium is magnesium comes in about 200 different forms, and the different magnesiums do different things.
Okay.
So what I would really say is have a conversation with a nutritionist, because depending on, for example, if you're constipated, magnesium citrate. If you're bunged up, you need magnesium. If you're loose, if you need magnesium glycinate. If you've got the muscle twitches, it's magnesium malate. So a combination sometimes won't give you the right magnesium, and therefore you're just kind of wasting your money. So it's better to actually just have a quick conversation and go, okay, these are my symptoms, what magnesium do you recommend? Personally, that's why I think kinesiology is brilliant, because we test it. We test it, and you can take different magnesiums. And the difficulty with Holland and Barrett is therapeutic. So firstly, their products aren't often made by food safe, so they're often synthetic, which means you're adding more problem. So I would definitely be saying go to a decent supplier, so a really good health food shop, not Holland and Barrett. So, postural analysis. I don't have my glamorous assistant. So, the muscles associated with hormonal imbalances, you probably won't be surprised to learn, wrong way. You won't be surprised to learn are gluteus maximus, gluteus medius, the adductors, and the piriformis, which is this muscle. And what's so interesting is so many women have hip issues. And so the gluteus maximus forms a band around here, big band around here, gluteus medius comes around. So these are our massive pelvic support muscles. So someone with gluteus medius issue will be walking with this leg kicking out. Yeah? Gluteus maximus is that butt not firing, so we can't get that nice Kardashian lift. And the piriformis issue is very, very much this pelvic stability. So we actually get a lot of women coming into clinic with things like the cervix dropped, the uterine ptosis. So either their uterus has dropped and the doctors are talking about putting in the mesh, or their cervix has dropped and then they're talking again about surgery. Whereas actually, we actually do a technique to get that back in the right place, and then it's all about strengthening those hip muscles, which is actually to do with balancing hormones. Yeah? Interesting. So I don't know if my hip issue contributed, because we don't know which comes first, the chicken or the egg, so I don't know if my hip issue contributed to the fact that I ended up in early menopause. Because if it's all linked electrically, it could. Yeah? Interesting. Yes.
Where does psoas come in?
Psoas is actually on the kidneys. On the kidneys. So our hormone muscles, so the gluteus maximus, we actually test by literally, I can't do it now, Laura. We test the gluteus maximus by essentially pushing the muscle there. The gluteus medius, we hold the leg out and we try and hold it out whilst we push it in. Adductors is the opposite way, so we're pushing the leg in whilst, so we're pushing the leg out while holding in, and then the piriformis is pushing the leg down. Pushing the leg down. So that's our circulation, that's our hormone muscles. So all pelvic stability, all of it. So the constant requirement for hip replacements often is linked to these hormone issues. So, any other questions? We should do our little quiz. So I've covered this over though. Can't be cheating. Name the 3 hormones involved in a woman's cycle. That's right, thank you very much, well done. When is the most common time of life that a woman experiences estrogen dominance? Perimenopause, yeah. What is the name of the synthetic hormone that is supposed to be a progesterone equivalent? Progestin, well done. I was going to say that's a tricky one, but it wasn't. Well done. Name one non-hormonal contraceptive option. Great. Name one muscle associated with hormones. Well done. Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. That was, you were a brilliant, brilliant group. Really enjoyed that. And any questions, you know where I am, and we'll also send you links to the videos. Thank you.
Thank you very much.